there was a conversation about like whether we have funded enough labor to like really manage these emergencies. First responder questions about whether they have even been equipped well, you know.
All right, folks, you are still listening to the Valley Labor Report. This is Alabama's only union talk radio show, and my name is Adam Keller. Really looking forward to this next interview. We are doing a little bit of a Earth Day special this year, and so I wanted to reach out to folks I knew in the environmental movement who are doing good work. And I was blessed to meet Julissa at the Houston Climate Summit and put on by the Climate Reality Project back in October. It was a really cool event. Learned a lot, and I met great people, including some of the team at GASP, the Greater Alliance to Stop Pollution in Birmingham. Really, really impressed with what they do. So, without further ado, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. My name is Jilisa Milton. I'm currently the Deputy Director for Advocacy and Strategic Partnerships with GASP. And I've been in that role since last October, which might be coming on 9 months soon.
That's right. You were brand new when I met you. I forgot about that.
Yes, and it's been a really good experience doing this work. So.
Awesome. And you have some experience already in like the movement, so to speak. You've been involved as an activist and an organizer and advocate. Could you speak to that? What have you been up to before this current role?
Yeah, I've for the last decade, I've been involved with so many social movements in Alabama and beyond. I graduated from undergrad and immediately jumped into work in Central Florida. And I'll talk about that a little bit later because there were some workers' rights and environmental issues there. And I was doing a lot of work with a migrant worker community there. And then kind of like coming back to law school and jumping head first in a lot of racial justice work because of my own experiences as a Black woman. And then since then, I've been doing so many things. I did budget and tax policy work. I've been doing work around reproductive justice. And so there's been a lot, of movement. But I think like when I got involved with the environmental justice work, I feel like a lot of the intersections of that work became very clear to me. So happy to be here today to talk about one of those intersections.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's one of the things that I wanted to do with this episode and what we try to do on the Valley Labor Report throughout is to look at those intersections between workers and labor and working class more broadly, but unions specifically, with aspects of our society, whether it's race, the environment, gender. There are intersections there that all affect the way we live. And I think given your very broad activist background, I mean, if there's a struggle, seems like you've been there, pretty much whatever the arena may be. And so I think that speaks to your work. And also it's why I wanted to speak to you today. So could you introduce GASP? What is GASP? What do y'all do?
So GASP is an environmental justice organization that focuses primarily on air pollution. And it was founded to address like a lot of the air pollution in Birmingham that was remnant of a lot of the industry that was here and is still here. I don't know if everybody's seen, but there were a couple lists that came out of like about a month ago about how Birmingham is one of the top 10 cities with the worst air quality. So we're still kind of struggling through this issue, and there's a lot of things, there's a lot of movement in the city about these questions. And we also do work with climate justice, and because it's important to understand the connection that air pollution has on climate in terms of climate, and also in terms of how some communities bear the brunt of the effects of these climate changes and weather changes and natural disasters and things like that. And there's a lot of correlations and intersections that we work on in terms of discussing resiliency of our communities because of environmental issues. Yeah, so that's
Yeah.
just what we do. I don't know if you know the most recent thing that people might be thinking of is the situation with the Moody landfill fire.
Mm.
And we do a lot of community education around air monitoring and around advocacy and helping people access process to agencies to advocate for better environments too. So that was one instance that we really jumped in because of how urgent it was and in the public health risk that it presented at that time. So people remember that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That was a big story, and I think the work that you're doing to empower folks to be able to advocate for themselves around these issues, that's so important. I think a lot of times we're led to believe that things can't change, that things can't get better. There's no use in speaking up, all that. And I think it's important that you have that backup in the education process to, yeah, to empower folks to be able to advocate. And something else you said that really resonates is that some communities bear the brunt of air pollution and climate change more than others. And that was something also I learned at that event in Houston that we were at. It really, it's something I knew, but it really like hammered it home, the disparities in communities. And, there's no coincidence that it's the poorest neighborhoods, the neighborhoods with the most racial minorities. Those are the neighborhoods that seem to bear the brunt of whether it's air pollution or any other environmental catastrophe. And I think that's something that is relevant to working class people, right? Because it's our neighborhoods that are impacted. Jeff Bezos, he's probably not very concerned about air pollution, right? He's very, he can be resilient. He has the resources. It's all the rest of us that are trying and struggling to have that resiliency. So GASP is doing good work there. And you mentioned Birmingham is really a major site of pollution in this state, historically and currently. So I think that's just, it's one of those things that maybe folks don't consider a workers issue, but it absolutely is because it's our communities and it's the industries in which we work. Right, someone works in these industries, so I think that's worth highlighting. So I wanted to ask you about that intersection, about environmental justice, air pollution, climate justice, the sorts of things y'all are working on. How does that intersect with the labor movement and unions and the sort of stuff that we work on?
Yeah, you've kind of started to name it a little bit. I know. So as I know in my family, my grandfather and his father worked in like the steel industry in Birmingham. And I grew up listening to him talk about how frustrating it was for his father to be at work and experience a lot of these really stark and rash labor issues related to safety, related to health and environment and things like that. And we see like how even in Birmingham, you see where these communities are front line to a lot of these coal industries that pollute the air, and they're literally fence line living near there. And that was a product of kind of some of these ideas originally when the city was built, in terms of having workers have access to where they worked, right? And before we had a lot of these really large conversations about, workers' rights in terms of like safety and OSHA and all these things, this was built in this way to for working class people to be living near their jobs, not necessarily about like how that could be affecting their bodies. And you're right, like some people, the people who ran these buildings in terms of like financially gaining the most probably didn't live that close. So there's these questions about like how that's still parallel. There's a lot of controversy in Birmingham about a particular neighborhood, the 35th Avenue Superfund site. And see like how now that we have these conversations, like, people's families have been living in the area for decades and generations. And, we're having these conversations about how their soil is polluted, right? And when you do something like environmental justice work, you kind of run into these conversations where these movements are pitted against each other, right?
Mm.
Like here, why would you want the facility to shut down? Because then I won't have my job. You see how these conversations are often seen as binary, but at the end of the day, the same people who are putting property before people's bodies in one way are also doing it in other ways, right? They decide where they're going to put their industry based on who they think would resist it, right? And so I definitely see the parallels. I also see the parallels when we talk about, how a lot of some of these political ideas about anti-regulation, like, EPA was being defunded, just as much as, these OSHA practices are being removed, this anti-regulation aspect, like you see that trickle down in several movements, not just like environmental. So it's like, it intersects in worker safety, it intersects in terms of like regulatory practices, and one, and you can see it every time. I know one instance in Moody, when we talk about Moody, there was a conversation about like whether we have funded enough labor to like really manage these emergencies and safety in terms of that way. Like you have these conversations that arise because these first responder questions about whether like they have even been equipped well, so yeah, I see that a lot. I think I mentioned that I used to do some work in Central Florida. At that time, I was doing an AmeriCorps program, and I went because I wanted to help high schoolers, right?
Right.
And they were like, I want to help high schoolers in Florida learn math, But then I got brought into this conversation about immigration, and the students and their families were going through working in nurseries. They were migrant workers, and they were dealing with pesticides at this particular, at these nurseries. So you see these kind of conversations about how they're treated because of their identity, but also as workers, like how that played out. And they would talk about their hands being burnt by chemicals,
Wow.
and there was a lake there that was called Lake Apopka. And I don't know if you've ever heard of the Farm Workers Association of Florida, but they talk about how historically they would drain this lake, farm it with workers, and then flood it back after the harvest is over, and that lake became contaminated. But then you see how all those workers are like generationally suffering through health issues. So like, so you just see like these remnants of like industry treating people in these unsafe ways, and it's direct association to how they treat the environment. So there's just so many parallels, and I do think we should work together because to at least make sure these industries at least adhere to some level of standard for our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so much you said there that really hits home, but I think it's in the intergenerational part is really worth pulling out, because this is something that affects people's lives and their children's lives and their grandchildren's lives. It's something that affects the entire community, and whether it's farm workers, whether it's coal miners, whatever the situation may be, and you talked about working together for certain standards. I can't help but think of the Warrior Met strike in Brookwood, and shortly after the UMWA miners went out on strike, of course, they brought in replacement workers, scabs, to the mines. And shortly after that, the Black Warrior River was heavily polluted, and so there's just another example right here in the state of Alabama of how these issues intersect. And, I think something that is also worth mentioning. You talked about the Superfund site, and the EPA and the way it's been underfunded over the years. And we see the same, like you mentioned with OSHA, the National Labor Relations Board, anything related to protecting folks, whether it's our air, our water, our rights in the workplace. It seems like any functions of government that have been set up ostensibly to help us have been under threat. And something else that you said that I really liked is that, the folks who put property over people, whether that's that translates across our society, whether it's the way they treat their workers, the way they treat the neighborhoods next to their plants, whatever the situation may be, or the environment as a whole, like the air and the climate that we all have to rely on. And I think that's really, really important.
Yeah.
Something else I wanted to just ask you to kind of, as we close the conversation, I wanted you to tell me just, what does environmental justice mean to you? Like why do you do what you do?
Yeah. Before I took this job, I know like not everybody is like gung-ho about the climate work, but I didn't quite understand, I think. I knew I wasn't against it, but I didn't understand it. And now that I've started to do the work, I feel a deeper connection to what this all means. And what I'm saying when I say that is that we don't, I find it very interesting in this like corporate society, and I've done policy work for some time, that we all recognize the kind of therapeutic, emotional enjoyment that we get from the environment. And I mean that in terms of like me, some really wealthy people on jet skis, like
Right.
people who go hunting,
go fishing. Yeah, absolutely.
fishing. We clearly have, not, and I want to say everyone, but I don't know everyone, but I've seen people from all backgrounds, at least on some level, acknowledge the role that has on us. And still, we end up in this situation where we make these decisions as a society to not protect that. And it's a really interesting double standard, because I definitely see the same people who make these decisions we can use like a really rich person, I don't know who, an example, go to San Tropez, go to the beach in Hawaii, and I think that I have had to think a lot about what that means to me, and also understand like the connection it has to my health. The connection, like what does it mean for some people to be able to sustain a hurricane and some people not, their whole lives are over. And that's directly tied to the same economic, racial, whatever connections that I have thought about in the past. And how some of us who are probably the people with the lowest income are the most connected to these things, these other things. So I think I guess I'll say that to say I feel passionate about this issue, because I can see ways that I can talk to people about it and reach their other values, like labor, like taking care of their families, like their racial identity, and talk about the kind of world we want to live in. Because there's nothing that brings us all together like living on Earth. Like there's just nothing, right. There's nothing. So I think I've gotten a lot from the last 9 months that has made me feel connected because of everything else I've done in social justice work. So I guess it's kind of a long way of answering that question, but yeah.
No, that's great. I mean, and that's to me, that's what it's all about, right? Is
yeah.
different forms of justice are all justice. And whether it's economic justice or racial justice, environmental justice, at the end of the day, it's about a better world for all of us, and recognizing our shared humanity and the dignity that we all deserve. And so I really appreciate your answer there. The last thing I'll ask is if you wanted to tell us about GASP in terms of getting plugged in, like where should folks go? Do y'all need volunteers or take volunteers? Like if anyone's interested, in just getting plugged in and finding out more, tell us about that.
Yes. So there's two things. One thing is our membership, and another thing is volunteers. So we are a membership-based organization, and the reason that we are is because we like to hear from our members, like what their thoughts are about these issues, and also because it helps us understand how we can advocate in different places in the state, because we know that there's not a lot of people, a lot of organizations that do air quality work in particular, and we know that if people become members in other areas, we can engage with them and learn about this question in different ways. So I'll start there. And then, so if you want to be a member, you can go to our website, gasgroup.org. And there's different tiers, and you can choose, or you can email us if you feel like that's not an option for you too. We also do take volunteers. We take volunteers a lot because we like to do a lot of outreach. So if you like talking to people about environmental stuff, then you're good. And we also take volunteers to help with some maternal things here and there. We also take interns. So if there's somebody who is maybe in school and is thinking about doing something, then we do that too. And you can email our executive director, Michael Hansen, and his email address is mhansen@gasgroup.org, or you can look on our website and email it there too. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of ways to plug in.
Awesome. And I'm wearing my shirt today. I am a proud member of GASP, because I believe in the work that y'all do, and I appreciate the work that y'all do. Was there anything else I didn't ask you, or anything else you wanted to say before we end it today?
No, I thank you so much for inviting us, because I've heard really good things about this work too, and about you, Adam. And I got the Valley Labor Report experience now. Some people were like, I wish I was going on there. So it was kind of cool to know I can.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And anytime y'all have something going on, if y'all have a big event coming, or if there's just, unfortunately, chances are there's going to be another disaster. And so there could be something really pressing to talk about. So whether it's yourself or anyone else from GASP, always welcome on the show, and really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.